Today we're going to be discussing Red Canary, the cloud, and you. Well, more specifically, we'll be talking about cloud protection, a bit about your security team and how to think about it, how to think about identifying your security gaps, and then how Red Canary can help you augment that team to help you secure your cloud, how we fill in those security gaps that you discover. My name is Kevin G. I am the Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager here at Red Canary. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 10 years, with a large chunk of that being within the cloud security space. Before Red Canary, I spent about 5 years as a technical marketing engineer at a cloud access security broker. And here at Red Canary, I primarily focus on our cloud integrations and capabilities, alongside a couple other things such as ROI and business value messaging. We have a lot to get into today, so I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into the presentation. And we're going to start kind of with the overall problem that organizations are facing, which primarily revolves around how do you stop and prevent threats, especially in the cloud. But more importantly, companies tend to be worried about breaches that go undiscovered, the threats that they don't see that might be happening in their environment, right? Lots of companies are worried about their visibility into the cloud, and this tends to be bore out in a lot of surveys and research, right? When we look at IBM's cost of a data breach report from last year, we see that it takes a long time for organizations to identify and contain some of the large, full-scale breaches. In this case, it takes 277 days on average to identify and contain a breach. When identities tend to be involved, it takes a little bit longer to fully resolve those. Even if you discover them earlier on, it might take more time to get back up and running and to clear them completely out of your system at a full 328 days, nearly a full calendar year. And this is unfortunately happening to lots of organizations, not just a few one-offs here and there. According to a Critical Start Landscape peer report from last year, nearly 2/3 of organizations who responded claim that they have been breached or have experienced a breach in some capacity or another. So why are these things happening? Like, why do threats occur? Why are they not being caught early enough? Or why are people not reacting properly to them in a timely fashion, even if they are discovered early? And it's largely because organizations have a lot of things to worry about, right? Your IT security team is probably overloaded with lots of things that they have to be in charge of, whether that's the actual infrastructure components of your organization, managing all of your workstations, your network infrastructure, your applications, and then now your cloud infrastructure, but all of the security tools that they have to deploy and implement and integrate with, and then monitor themselves. And then that's not to include all of the other things that come with a proper security organization, right? Worrying about compliance, worrying about hiring, staffing, training, educating, and dealing with burnout and churn of the people that you hire. All of the preparation and pre-threat things that you need to do to prepare your team, the threat intelligence and research, the configuration and access management stuff, like all of the processes that you put in place, your threat modeling and simulations, and stuff like that. And then to have to be able to actively monitor, to detect threats, know what you're looking at, to identify what's real and what's a false positive, and then have the security knowledge and experience to respond in a timely fashion. And then, of course, having to worry about the, hopefully, knock on wood, no one here will ever experience the post-threat, right? The actual breach stuff where you're in recovery mode after the fact. Now, when you zoom in on all of that into just the cloud infrastructure stuff, while cloud makes people's work lives easier, makes it more efficient for developers, there's a whole host of benefits, it's more cost effective, it tends to make security much more difficult. And that is constantly bore out in data where security teams feel like they just can't get a hold of their cloud security. They just don't know what to do with cloud. Maybe it's new to them, maybe it's overly complex, maybe they are multi-cloud, whatever. According to a CSA State of Security Remediation report that was just released in February, only 23% of respondents report having full visibility into their cloud. This is often mirrored with other reports and surveys out there. A Checkpoint 2023 survey showed that 3/4 of organizations that responded are concerned or extremely concerned about the security of their cloud environments. And this is true no matter what way you write this, no matter what you're looking at, how you flip the data. Basically, what it's saying is 3/4 of organizations out there are extremely worried about their cloud environments because they either don't have full visibility or they maybe have the tools implemented. They just don't know what to do with that data and all of the alerts coming in. They don't have the knowledge, expertise to respond correctly or to make sense of what's going on, or maybe even to configure the cloud correctly. And one final data point here, 79% of respondents to the Sales Cloud Security Survey last year said that they are a multi-cloud environment, meaning that they are using more than one cloud service provider. So AWS, GCP, or Azure, they're using more than one of those. Why is that important? Because the cloud is extremely complicated and it is very difficult or nearly impossible if you are just a single person on an IT security team to be an expert in any one of these things, right? Here's a sample from AWS directly. This is included in our AWS visibility guide that breaks down the number of services across different categories within AWS that you have to know what they do in order to configure them properly. And that's not to include all of the roles and access permissions and policies that you can build out and all of these different things inside of AWS, right? Very, very complicated to pay attention to. Now, when you look at it from the threat side, the detection coverage that you have to build out, for example, in Azure, something like this, right? You have to pay attention to all the possible tactics that a adversary can use to disguise what they're doing: port mapping, IP discovery, using valid credentials, password spraying, privilege escalation, account manipulation, all of these sorts of things that they are using to attack and breach your environment. Stay with that access, continued access there, escalate their privilege to eventually get to your sensitive data, your critical resources for whatever they are attempting to do in that breach. And oh yeah, these two things were only the control plane. You can't forget about the fact that you can spin up a whole host of different sorts of cloud instances, aka endpoints in the cloud, that you also have to worry about, right? You could spin up virtual machines, containers, serverless functions, databases, all sorts of things. And some of these things aren't permanent, they're ephemeral. So you might think like, oh, we spin this up for a couple of months and then delete it, let it fizzle out, do whatever with it. You might think like, hey, I don't need to have security over there, but you still do have to monitor those things. Those are still points of attack, points of entry for an adversary to get in. And even if you think, hey, it's on a virtual machine, it's isolated somewhere, there are ways for them to perform lateral movement to get into other systems, right? They could jump from virtual machine to virtual machine to containers, or they could escape to the host and get back into your control plane where they could do lots of damage. So lots of things to worry about within the cloud. And what we're seeing is that organizations need help. It is becoming much more difficult to nearly impossible for organizations to have enough budget and resources to build out the security team required to stay ahead of threats, to stay ahead of the adversaries that can be attacking their organization. And this is constantly bore out in surveys and data and industry reports that we see. Again, the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report last year found that only 1/3 of companies were able to identify those breaches with their internal team. So what does that mean? That means that nearly 2/3 of the breaches that occurred last year that IBM studied were actually identified by somebody else outside of that company. Now, hopefully, a large chunk of that was identified by some sort of third-party security service like a Red Canary or like an MDR or something like that. But what is often the case is that once the adversary has, exfiltrated your data or encrypted all of your information, their breach is complete. Oftentimes, what's included in that 2/3 is the adversary revealing the breach themselves, right? They're already at the point where they've gotten your data, and they are now coming to collect the money, and they are starting to ransom it back to you. And that's how a company discovers that they've been attacked in the first place. Again, why is this happening? It's because organizations don't have the capacity to build all of the stuff out that they need to internally with their security team. According to this ESG ISSA report last year, 71% of organizations say that they have been impacted by the cybersecurity skills shortage. And this isn't anything new. This has been happening for multiple years across the industry. There are more cybersecurity jobs available right now than there are people available to fill them. So what that means is that you cannot hire enough people on your team and retain those people to successfully have a security team ready with the right skills, knowledge, and experience necessary to stay ahead of threats and to implement security tools and to make sense of all of the alerts, because the only way to do so is often to poach other people, right? Or maybe people on your team are getting poached and it's hard to deal with that constant turnover and churn. Or even if you hire people, they might not have the right security knowledge or the right experience to be able to make sense of what they're seeing and to react to alerts in a timely manner and to resolve those type of threats. But luckily, what we've been seeing, and Critical Start saw this in their survey report, is that 93% of organizations are admitting that they need help and are deciding that, hey, in the next 2 years, we're probably going to be seeking help from a third-party service, or we're going to be partnering with them and implementing them to help us shore up all of our security shortfalls. So with that knowledge and knowing that, hey, you might not be able to do everything on your own, what can you do? What are your options? How do you start to think about where to seek help, right? Where do you identify your own gaps and try to figure out what needs to be done in-house and what can be outsourced? So what I would recommend is using any sort of, cybersecurity framework. In this case, we tend to use the NIST framework ourselves and build out a cyber defense matrix. We're not the first people to do this, but this is a good way to kind of be transparent and honest with yourself to assess your own security gaps. You would fill out the, different columns of the NIST framework, in this case, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover across the top, and then all of the domains that you need to cover within your organization between SaaS, cloud, identity, and so forth down the side. And then in each of these boxes, give yourself a hard-coded rating to say how well you have that covered or how weak you feel, or if you feel that that is a gap. You could use any type of scale. So for example, on the top under cloud, I have like a 1 to 5 scale saying 1 is very weak, 5, we are well covered. You could do it 1 to 10 or 1 to 20, however, detailed you want to be in this case. And just kind of fill them out to identify, hey, we need help here, we don't need help here, and this is where I need to put my dollars and my focus. You could be a little bit more binary like I did on the endpoint one, where it could be like a negative, a neutral, and a positive, meaning -1 is, hey, this actively hurts us. We are so bad in this area. And we need to heavily focus here. A 0 can mean we are neutral. We have some coverage. We probably need to improve it, but there are other priorities that we need to focus on first. And then a 1 is, hey, no, we are well covered here. This is a strength of our company. We don't need to think about it. And then that way you could identify where you need to allocate your focus and budget. The next thing that you should do, as you notice that was all color-coded, is figure out what you could do in-house or what you need to do in-house versus what are some of the things that are common, not unique, mundane, frequent tasks that could possibly be outsourced to somebody who has done this over and over and over. So what do I mean by that is things that you could do in-house, things that you need to do, things that are unique to your business, tasks that are very high risk, high value, highly sensitive. Maybe it deals with intellectual property rights. Maybe it deals with in-house applications that only your company can handle. Those are the type of things that you must address internally, and you would color code them accordingly. And then for everything else, when you think about your organization, there are probably plenty of other organizations within your same vertical, same size, that are all doing the same thing as you, trying to spin up a security team. So what that means is that there are plenty of organizations out there, whether similar to you or third-party orgs, that have spun up entire businesses built around those common things that everyone else has to deal with, right? The universal threats, the 24/7 monitoring, the threat intelligence and research part of it. Certain things that are kind of global across the board, that those are the things that you might be able to outsource or co-manage. And so what you could do is take something like, again, the NIST framework, similar to the cybersecurity defense matrix, and kind of break it down by those color codings. And then you can start to see, hey, what are things that we have to do internally? What are things that we can possibly completely hand off to somebody external? And what are things that we might want to co-manage where there's some bits of overlap, where we are wanting to work with a outsourced partner, a third-party service, partner with them and collaborate on some of these things, right? So in this case, I have it broken down where some of those, process and management things are completely internal, threat intel and research. That might be co-managed to you, or it could be fully externally managed. And then some of the detection, response, and protection parts of it can be something that you cooperatively do with a trusted partner, right? You build out the threat simulation. Maybe you can't do it all on your own, but having somebody else there who has run the reps and done the threat intel and research constantly across a number of industries and a number of threats and a number of tactics, and build that out heavily, and that is their whole business model, can help you improve yours, right? Benefit from the work that others have already put in and the experience that they've built in total. So how does Red Canary help in this case? And we'll zoom specifically in to cloud security and stuff like that. In general, whatever challenges your security team is facing, again, as you go through those exercises and you hone in on cloud security or whatever it might be, you're probably going to come across the same sort of challenges within the cloud. And maybe some of those things might be magnified because, again, as we saw, the cloud is more complicated and maybe it's more difficult to get out the most security from the tools that you've invested in the cloud, or you're still unsure of how you're configuring it, leaving you potentially open to risks and vulnerabilities that you're not aware of, right? So whether you don't have enough staff and resources, you might think that you lack the cloud expertise, or you're finding it difficult to operationalize those tools that you've invested in, leading to, depending on where you are in your cloud journey, project stalling, or you feel like your cloud is at risk. Red Canary kind of fits in wherever you need us to be, right? We provide the experts. We have the threat research and intel arm. We have the capability to monitor your environments 24/7, help you operationalize those security tools. And then we're there to provide proactive security guidance and threat response whenever something is detected in your environment. So when I talked about benefiting from a company that has done the reps and that has, decades worth of threat intelligence and detection, building and analytics and threat hunting experience, this is kind of what it looks like in a life cycle of what our team is, right? We don't have just a few people doing these things. We have dedicated teams deployed across different areas who specialize in stuff, right? We have our intel and research team constantly researching, looking for new tactics, new information, anything like that. They process it, and then they work with our detection engineers to help fine tune that information, help them build out the analytics, the individual detectors, and then they fine tune those and then eventually deploy them into our platform in order to help us trigger alerts, trigger anything that we could possibly identify as malicious behavior for our other, detection engineers, SOC analysts, and threat hunters to go in and do those deep dive investigations to help you determine what is real and what is false positives in order to respond. But when you think about, an MDR threat response, it doesn't just start with that threat detection and response part, right? And it doesn't end there once something has been resolved. There is this constant life cycle loop where everything is just constantly feeding back into the intelligence reports, into the detectors, making sure that we are refining that process constantly with new things that we learn as we go through a threat hunt or as we respond to a threat in somebody's environment. And you benefit from all of that when we see it across our entire customer base or across other organizations that are in the same industry vertical as you, or the same size as you, or the same type of threats that you might be seeing. We help build that into our platform. And what does that help you protect against when it comes to cloud? So we'll help you kind of identify and mitigate one of the main points of entry, which is the initial access attempts, whether they are malicious via, stealing or compromising credentials. That could be through phishing attacks, brute force attacks, MFA exhaustion, things of that nature, or the sort of accidental things such as like misconfigurations, right? Setting up your cloud incorrectly, opening you up to those risks and vulnerabilities for people to get in, or combinations, right? We could help you kind of identify when those things happen to help stop the eventual threat from occurring. We also look at all of the behavioral activity occurring if somebody were to get into your environment, right? When they are performing all of those things that you saw along that Azure detection coverage thing, right? Performing reconnaissance, privilege escalation, lateral movement, establishing persistent access, locating your sensitive data, and establishing external connections. And all of this is in service to prevent the final breach impact from ever happening. Because in the end, all malicious actors attacking your cloud are trying to basically do one thing, which is extract money from you in some way, shape, or form. Most often it occurs in encrypting or exfiltrating your data to ransom it back to you. Sometimes it takes the form of resource hijacking, where they use it for their own purposes to make money, oftentimes crypto mining, but sometimes it could be using all of your resources to do another attack on somebody else. So what that looks like from Red Canary's perspective, how do we integrate with things? What type of tools and stuff do we integrate with, and how do we do it? So we integrate directly with a number of cloud service providers, kind of the big three: AWS, Azure, and GCP. We ingest all of that raw log data from each one of these, right? CloudTrail, Azure audit logs, GCP cloud audit logs. We'll also take in the native alerts. GCP is currently in early access, so the native alert ingestion and processing will come a little bit later after that. So just kind of make a note of that. But we will take all of that information in and correlate it. We also tie in together with a couple of key technological partners, right? Lacework, Defender for Cloud, and we are also working on our integration with Wiz coming soon as well. So we'll take in some of those cloud posture management alerts, correlate all that information with what we're seeing from a behavioral standpoint happening in the control plane. And then, as I mentioned, you can't forget about the data plane, all of those ephemeral cloud instances or your production runtime environments. We have our own Red Canary Linux EDR tool that you can install there, but we also pair together with any other EDRs that might support Linux environments as well to ingest all of those runtime processes and user activity within those cloud instances to help you secure your entire cloud, no matter if it's the control plane or, again, your cloud instances. So I appreciate your time on this call. What's next for you after this? Obviously, check out our website. Plenty of great information there. If you want to get a little bit more hands-on, see some of our cloud capabilities firsthand from an expert, go ahead and register for a demo. And then, of course, we provided a number of good resources, a couple data sheets, and that AWS visibility guide. Highly recommend checking that one out. Again, cloud configuration is very, very complex, and it is definitely something helpful to be able to quickly kind of see kind of a breakdown of the foundation of the things that you need to pay attention to, how to kind of set some of those up and how to configure them to get started. But mostly these are all of the things that you need to worry about and to make sure that you have knowledge of them to make sure you are mitigating and reducing risks due to possible misconfigurations. So again, thank you very much, and hope you have a great day.